60 did two things that I think have been detrimental to Vermont. Number one, it caused a divisiveness between the towns, because some towns pay much more towards Montpelier than they ever get back. We were promised in Brattleboro that Brattleboro would never be a gold town, or Nancy Chard and Peter Shulman wouldn't have voted for Act 60. Well, we are a gold town. We're not as gold as some towns, but we're still sending more to Montpelier than we're getting back. So the divisiveness is not helpful. Another thing Act 60 does is it discourages our communities from bringing in commercial enterprises, because the less commercial base you have, the more you qualify to be not a gold town, and therefore you get more than you send up to Vermont, to Montpelier. That does not encourage job creation. That does not encourage our young people from coming here. And so I think that those factors are working against each other, and they're working against us. Another thing that Act 60 does, it's for $90,000 with this income sensitivity, people who earn $90,000 or less qualify in a stepped position. And people can come into the state with a lot of money, buy a $500,000 house, pay for it full. They have no mortgage. Their kids are out of college. This could also be for retirees. And so their expenses are very little, and they can keep their expenses to about $30,000 or $40,000 and get thousands and thousands of dollars back to pay for their property tax. But the state never looks at their assets. They could be sitting on $1 million or $2 million, and yet they are being subsidized for their property tax by the taxpayer. And renters, we're always talking about how we're very concerned about the poor and people who are renting, and not that all poor people are renters, but they obviously aren't building equity in a house. They're paying it in the chin, as are the working family who just buys a house and has a big mortgage and kids to support. That's the group, because they're not qualified for income sensitivity, that is supporting these other issues. We have to look at it.
When we bring up the issue of property taxes, it's really just another way of saying we've got a problem in our economy. And when people are struggling as individuals with property taxes, the main reason is because the commercial sector, the business sector, has stagnated or declined and is not keeping pace with the growth of the population. Therefore, the property tax burden shifts pretty much to the residential homeowner. The way to resolve this, it's been mentioned, but the way to resolve this is to ensure that we have a business-friendly environment. And I beg to differ with my opponent. I don't want to just have a cherry-picked idea of government knows best, and we're going to choose which are going to be the winners and losers in our society and our business environment by saying, well, we want this kind of business, but we don't want that kind of business. I think we can have reasonable limits. I think we can have reasonable controls, but at the same time, we need to have an open door policy. Therefore, we need to revisit some of these laws that are on the books, not to scrap them necessarily, but to revise them and examine what economic impact they're having on this state. The other thing to keep in mind is that when we keep the idea of government as being the final go-to for all of our social problems and ills, whether it's hunger, whether it's housing, or whether it's health care, we're really talking money. Whenever someone talks about those issues, yeah, if we had plenty of money, everybody would be lined up saying, well, of course, let's do all those things. But we now have over $100 million deficit, and it's going to get worse. We're approaching at 60 miles an hour a cliff, and we're about to drive off, and we're talking about new entitlements. We're talking about new mandates. We're talking about expanding old programs. We've got to put the brakes on.
Schools, I basically support the tenets of the Brigham decision and of Act 60. I know there are some issues with it. We've lived in Vermont for 40 years, and in that 40 years I've seen, I think, at least 5 or 6 different school funding formulas. Some towns hated every one of them, and some towns loved every one of them because there were winners and losers in each of them. I think schools, our local school boards have worked really hard to they've cut millions out of their budgets in the last couple of years. And there is an economy of scale. I mean, you can't cut, it kind of goes like this, your student ratio and your expenses, and then the student ratio goes down, and then your expenses go down. So they're trying really hard. I don't think we should further penalize them. I do want to say something about the people who who have a lot of assets and don't have a lot of income to declare. And we tried this last year to take care of that in the Senate. We had a proposal that on the form where you fill out your homeowner's rebate form, there was a line on there where you would declare the income, the line from your federal tax form where you declare your dividend, your interest income. And there was a formula that was used to get at people who have a lot of assets, liquid assets, and aren't using those, and other people are paying their taxes. It was really watered down. Say the House did it, and it was a bipartisan effort. It had nothing to do with being a Republican or a Democrat. It was a bipartisan effort, and we also said that we should have a declaration, and this got a little bit iffy in there because there wasn't any way of doing it. If you had a net asset worth of more than $1 million, you should declare it, and you should voluntarily not take a rebate. That didn't go anyplace, but we'll push it again next year.
Windham County has had a very slow growth rate for the last few years. Do you think there's a need for economic growth? And if so, how would you address this need? And I think I start with Peter this time.
As I've gone around the county and talked to business people, it's clear that so many of our businesses are just barely hanging on. And so it is important that we focus on ways in which we can help business, recognizing that the state is itself an institution with very much finite resources. It's not a very big government. It's not going to be able itself to fix business. But there are some things that we can do. First, in the 21st century, there are terrific jobs that people can do from home, that young people can stay here in Vermont to do, or people can come to Vermont and do. And I've encountered couples, a wife who works as an investment banker in New York and a husband who is a consultant working here, both of them paying taxes here. But they can't do it without 21st century technology, which we do not have in so much of Windham County, in spite of promises to bring that about. So we need to have broadband and cell phone coverage. I know this firsthand because I've run an international business from Townsend without either. I've had a client, the Prime Minister of East Timor, calling me. I was handling negotiations for the country. He would call me daytime in East Timor, nighttime in Townsend, not be able to reach me. He could call me from any place in the poorest country in Asia, and he couldn't reach me in a place that when he looked on the map, he thought was practically New York City. That's simply not acceptable. A second point I'd make, we're part of a global economy. What is the new investment in Brattleboro? It's Commonwealth Yogurt, a foreign group. And one of the things that I hope I can bring to the Vermont legislature is to actually make use of my international experience and connections to help connect us and Vermont businesses and Windham County businesses to the broader international community.
Right.